All right. Welcome, ladies. We are glad you're here to our webinar this evening, Women's Retirement Roadmap. It was a mouthful full for me tonight, so glad everybody's on tonight. We got a lot of good material to cover this evening. It's going to be fun. I've got some stories to tell you inside the material, so I think we'll try to make it interesting and have a good time, but glad to see you logging on. Now, I've got to put a disclosure up here, and they tell me to hold it up for a few seconds, but it basically says that the things that we talk about tonight are for example purposes only. I don't know each of your personal situations, but we've had it up long enough now. So tonight we are going to talk about some specific risks and challenges that you ladies out there face that the gentlemen don't necessarily face in their retirement. And that should have you drawing a few questions in your mind. You might think, well, why would women have challenges in retirement that men don't have? Or some of you may already know some of the challenges. But frankly, the biggest reason that women experience challenges in retirement that are different from men is because you women are outliving us men. So you guys are living a lot longer. And when we look at the averages, think about this statistic. 80% of men die married, but 80% of women die single. So think about that. Let that sink in. This is really where the challenges come from. So the second question you might be thinking in and around tonight is, why are Glenn and Jonathan, two men, so passionate about bringing you ladies information about challenges in retirement? And I'll tell you, it really stems from two reasons in both of our lives. The first reason I'll tell you is just really it all started when I was a child. It was my mother's influence on my life. My mother's a big part of my life. She always has been. In fact, she still works with us today, right up at the front desk at Keystone Financial. But when I was a child, my mother and father had a divorce, and it was unlike a typical divorce. We considered it more of an abandonment. My father pretty much just left, cut ties, did not see him much at all. And I really saw my mother go from living in safety and security and being a homemaker and really taking care of us kids to suddenly having to become the primary breadwinner. And I saw her go through a lot of anguish, a lot of confusion during that time. There weren't many people to give her a lot of advice. There was a lot of trial and error. And I remember thinking, man, I want to make sure that that doesn't happen to her ever again, and any other people that I can protect from that. And so a lot of who I am, a lot of what I do, a lot of the reward that I get past anything economic is knowing that for a lot of you ladies out there, I serve as an advocate in your corner, that I'm there to protect you. I'm there to take care of things. I'm there to make sure that you don't experience the same pitfalls that she did. And so that's a lot of what motivates me. For Glenn, his personal story has a lot of motivation from his grandmother. Very similar story, but his grandmother lost her spouse and suddenly had to take over the full farm by herself and run through a lot of challenges during that time. So that's a lot of our personal makeup. Now, as a company, it's been a neat story to just watch our influence with ladies grow over the years organically. It all started many years ago when Glenn and I partnered, and we started working with a lot of ladies that were in a ladies golf group. And from that group, it was really neat. They reached out and introduced us to a ladies group of nurses. And then we met another hospital group of nurses, all ladies. And from there, they introduced us to a ladies teachers group. And we have found ourselves just over the years blessed with this wonderfully large demographic of single, widowed, and divorced ladies that Glenn and I take care of. So we take care of approximately 800 families here in Middle Tennessee, but so many of those in that number are single, widowed, and divorced ladies. And so it's a big part of what we do. And those ladies continue to challenge Glenn and I. They'll tell us wonderful things like, oh my goodness, we're so thankful that you were able to show us these things, but we wish that we had known them years before we had even met you. You guys have got to do things to where you're educating these ladies early on. They need your help. And so that really motivates us to do what we do. So enough about us. I see more of you logging in now, and that's fantastic. Thank you for logging on to the webinar tonight. For all of you ladies that are just logging in, some of you just now, stay with me till the end. I've got a story that I want to share with everybody that's on tonight. It's a story that was really pivotal in changing the culture of our company, Keystone, forever. And so it changed us from that moment forward. It's a part of who we are today. And I want to make sure and share that with you ladies close to the end. So hang on with me. All right, so let's jump ahead. You know, when we're thinking about preparing for retirement, you know, our lives as a whole, they can be related financially to mountain climbing. It's a good analogy. So if you think about it, as we're climbing up the mountain, we spend the majority of our time in our working years in this accumulation stage. And if you calculate it out, you're going to spend upwards of 90,000 hours of your life in this accumulation stage moving up the mountain. And you think, well, yeah, 40, 50 hours a week, 52 weeks in a year, 40 to 45 years of work history. You guys are going to have 90,000 hours or more in that stage. And then when you reach the top, this is when people really begin asking a lot of questions, because going down the mountain, we liken that to this distribution stage of retirement. But when we plateau up at the top, Glenn and I typically get two major questions as people are preparing to head back down the mountain. And the first two questions that they'll ask us is, hey, is it going to be enough? And they'll ask it in multiple ways, and it's really fun to hear which way it will be asked next time. But they'll say, is it going to be enough to last me for my lifetime? Is it going to be enough what I've put away for retirement? Is it going to be enough that I can retire at the age I want to retire? And the last question is it going to be enough for me to experience retirement the way that I want to experience it? And so so much of what Glenn and I do is in preparation of going back down this mountain in the distribution stage. And likening retirement again to mountain climbing, think about it. Do most of the incidences, do most of the accidents in mountain climbing happen on the ascent or the descent? And I see some of you in the chat box already answering, but yes, it is the majority of the accidents happen on the descent. And so you ladies, if you were mountain climbing, many of you would choose to have a guide help you up and down the mountain. But it's so funny. That's what Glenn and I consider ourselves. We consider ourselves a guide. But it's so funny that so many ladies out there try to do this all on their own. In fact, when we look at the statistics, not just ladies, but of investors as a total, only 17% of investors out there actually use an advisor to help them in their investments. Now, incidentally, when we look at how did that 17% that used an advisor fare in relation to the ones that didn't use an advisor, and the evidence is compelling that the folks that used an advisor did so much better 9 times out of 10 than the folks that try to do it themselves. The other piece of compelling information is when we look at the costs involved, out of all the different things that you can outsource during retirement, outsourcing your guide services around retirement and planning and working within the investments is actually one of the least expensive things that you can outsource in your retirement. However, for people that do it themselves, we see that that takes them some of the most time out of their day of what they do in retirement. So most of you, if you think about it, you did not envision yourself in retirement waking up every day to open up your investment accounts and try to strategize what you were going to do. You picture yourselves in retirement doing the things. Information I want to share with you. At the end, I'll give you an opportunity if some of you ladies out there are thinking I would like some help. So hang in there with me. Now, When we look at retirement, there's a picture of a lady in this one. I think it's fun. She's kicking up her heels, and Glenn and I want each of you to be able to kick up your heels. But there's some kicks in retirement, 3 of them, and all of you ladies out there listening are going to experience you are going to experience kicking off your retirement. That's going to happen for everybody. But then after that happens, you're going to fall into one of 2 groups. You're either going to be in that group that's kicking yourself for not doing a better job of saving and investing, or you're going to be in a group that is kicking it up and enjoying the great planning that you've done. So Glenn and I want to make sure that you're in that latter group, kicking it up and enjoying the great plan that you've done. And I will share some encouraging information with you ladies that in all the years that Glenn and I have been working together and working with helping people plan and helping people in their investments, we have had a 99% retention rate at Keystone Financial. That means less than 1% of the people that have come on and had us help them have ever left and gone anywhere else. And we are so proud to get to tout that. So we've got a 99% retention rate. The other thing that Glenn and I are really, really proud of is that out of all the hundreds of plans that we've created over all these years, not one of those plans has ever failed. And so we use some creative methodology that we've been working with for many, many years, and people really like it. It makes sense to them, and most of all, it works. So I'll share a little bit of that with you along the way. So hang in here. Now, I want to talk about 3 retirement realities for you ladies that are on tonight, okay? And the box that says 49%, that circle, and these stats, by the way, are from a Transamerica study, so I'll give the source there. But 49% of women fear that they will end up broke and homeless at the end of their life. 49% of women have that fear. Now, 90% of women out there believe that they need to become more involved with their retirement planning and their retirement accounts. 90% of women believe they need to become more involved. And out of that 90%, when we're looking at it, those women really break into 2 subgroups. So once that 90% realize, hey, I need to become more involved, one subgroup will begin to think about that for a few minutes, and then maybe they'll procrastinate. Or they'll think about that a little bit and they'll say, I need to get more involved, but then something more important will come up. Or they'll just go into analysis paralysis and freeze up altogether. That's one subgroup. The other subgroup of the 90 percentile will say, yes, I need to become more active and more involved in my retirement accounts and my planning. And those ladies will go out, they'll do some research, they'll get involved, they'll take action, they'll begin moving forward, and things fare so much better. So ask yourselves this question tonight. Which of those 2 groups do you think you fall into? And which of those 2 groups would you want to fall into? And hopefully those 2 answers will align, okay? Now, the last circle, 44%. 44% of American women are single, widowed, or divorced. 44%. Now, if you're listening tonight and you're married, don't exonerate yourself out of that 44%, because there's a very high possibility that at some point in your life, you could fall into the widowed or divorced group as well. So that's a lot of ladies out there that are single, widowed, or divorced. But even out of the married percentile, a lot of them will end up in the reality of the 44%. So I want to share those statistics with you because it really says to you ladies, hey, I need to become involved because this is very real to me. Now, the next one is talking about some unique retirement risks, and I covered a couple of those right at the beginning. We're just going to go in more depth as we continue on. But unique retirement risks are this. 12% of ladies out there are confident in their abilities to retire comfortably. Okay, 12% think they'll retire comfortably. 53% of ladies think that they're going to have to work till after age 65. And a third of ladies out there, only a third, are using an advisor. Now, think about this. If 33% of women out there are using an advisor, but only 12% feel like they're going to retire confidently and comfortably, that means that a big percentage of the 33% that are using the advisor don't trust their advisor. And I will tell you, there is a very specific reason for that. And I'll talk to you just briefly about it. But a lot of those ladies are using an advisor that is basically just an investment salesman or a broker. And they're solely working on accumulation, but they're not working on the planning side. Okay. So the money's the only purpose that they have is growth and accumulation. And so they're not very confident about what retirement is going to look like because they're not really doing the planning work. Okay. The other thing is that there are two standards out there in the industry. There's a fiduciary standard and a suitability standard. I would submit to you, ladies, that if you are looking for a guide to help you out there, make sure and use a fiduciary. Fiduciary is just like your attorney, just like your accountant, just like your physician out there, the other professionals in your life that you trust, those are all fiduciaries. And as a fiduciary, you take an oath that the things that you prescribe to someone have to be to their best interest above your best interest. And you would think, well, I thought that's the way the industry was as a whole, but actually, the industry is the majority made up of suitability standard advisors, which means when you go into that big box firm or you go into that brokerage, that advisor doesn't necessarily have to prescribe what's to your best interest. They just have to prescribe things that are suitable to the masses. And so that's why so many ladies, as they come into us for the first time, they'll say, I felt like I've gotten a cookie cutter approach over the years. And the reality is that's just what's happened. They've gotten a cookie cutter approach. So make sure that you're working with a fiduciary. Make sure that the things that are being prescribed to you are unique to you and they're to your best interest and they're resolving things as efficiently as they can for you. Okay. Now, let's talk about women's retirement saving statistics, okay? And the question is, will more women or men age 65 plus end up in poverty? And compellingly, women are 80% more likely to end up in poverty than their male counterpart. Now, it talks about what are the cost of women's versus men's health care for those over 65. And again, this is because women are living longer. You're actually healthier, but you live longer. And because of that longer lifespan, it's a considerable increase to how much healthcare costs are for ladies than for men. And then it says, who saves more for retirement, men or women? And again, and this ties right into some things I'm going to talk about in a minute, but again, women save on average 43% less than their male counterpart. And so much of that is due to their earnings potential. And so I want to talk about that. That's the next slide. Let's talk about women's earnings potential a little bit. You ladies out there do some wonderful things. My mother did this as well. It's so honorable. Many of you will take time out to raise a family. You'll take time out giving birth to children. You'll take time out as a caretaker. We even see a lot of times that ladies will take time out to be the caretaker of their spouse's parents. Okay. And when you take those times out, it is a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice to you. And it is a sacrifice that should be noted, but it also affects your earnings potential. Okay. And I'm thankful that so many ladies make the sacrifice. I wouldn't be here if my mother hadn't. Okay. But you need to be aware of, on the other side of it, there is some planning that needs to be done towards your retirement around the sacrifice that has been made. And you also need to take some more stringent care of looking at how to orchestrate things along the way to make up for the time that you took out. Okay. So Social Security is one of these first things that we talk to ladies about, that it really makes a big difference how they turn on their benefit, when they turn on their benefit, and what strategy they use overall. And when we're looking at that, A lot of times ladies will think, well, I haven't even really thought about Social Security. Will it still be here? And yes, Social Security should still be here. Absolutely. There's some things that they need to fix about the plan, but 77% of the funding of the plan is still very sound right now, even past 2033. So Social Security should be here for sure. And it should be one of your largest retirement assets. If you figure if you're drawing $2,500 a month off of something, for the next 25, 30 years, that's going to be a very sizable asset of your retirement, and it needs to be planned around appropriately. So let's talk about some of the issues and some things that you can plan around. Now, I want to talk to you about the impact of the zero earning years and work histories. For those years that you took out for taking care of a loved one or for raising a child, your Social Security benefit is figured based on a 35-year average of your working years, and it's going to take the highest 35 years. So if you have some 0 years in that 35-year work history, it does have an impact. You ladies can remember how it was on test scores. You know, if you were in school and you had zeros in there, even with 100, it brought it down considerably. So now, I also want to talk about divorced and widowed survivors' benefits. There's a lot of confusion in and around this, and I'll try to bring some logic to it for you. And then finally, inheriting your spouse's benefits. So let's jump in. This next slide is a pretty good slide that is showing the impact of Mrs. Jones having taken out some years. Let's see, there were 7 years that Mrs. Jones took out of her work history. And the point is, every time Mrs. Jones works an additional year out of the 35, one of those 0 years will come off of that. So if you ladies know how many years you took off for raising children and things along those lines, you can possibly make some decisions around your working history that will help make up for those 0 years, taking some of them off, okay? Now, the next slide, if you looked at, again, this is a comparison of a married couple where he didn't take off any of those years and she did. And not only is it compelling how much less that she earned on an annual basis, but look at the lifetime totals. This is a huge difference. And this is because not only did she earn less during her life, that allowed her to put away less for retirement, and it also affected her Social Security benefits going forward in retirement. So, ladies, this is an obstacle that you run into that gentlemen typically do not. And you need to make sure and have it planned for, or have somebody in your life that is helping you with these decisions as you're making them along the way. Now, the widowed versus divorced benefits. This is a lot of fun on this one. So, especially when we get to the divorcee benefits. But on the widow benefits, you can begin claiming a survivor benefit. If your spouse passes, you can begin claiming a survivor benefit as early as age 60. Now, if you have children still living at home dependent, you can claim it even before then. But by age 60, you can begin taking a survivor benefit. Now, what a lot of ladies don't understand is that with Social Security, there's 2 buckets. There's a survivor benefit bucket, and there's a completely separate bucket that is your own Social Security benefit. And right now, you can still access both buckets. So you could begin taking a survivor benefit, and you could take that benefit for years. Meanwhile, your own benefit could be accumulating at 8% survivor benefit, switch over to your own benefit, and actually be making more in Social Security. So this strategy still remains out there to date with the widow benefits, and it's something that you need to be aware of. Now, if a widow remarries, you also need to be aware that if she's past 60 years old, that survivor benefit goes on unaffected. And so I know a lot of ladies will make decisions around remarrying or not based on the Social Security benefit, but that survivor benefit would go on unaffected after age 60. Now, the divorcee benefits, okay? This one is one where we get so many questions, and invariably, almost on a weekly basis, I'm able to help a lady along the line that didn't understand that if you were married for 10 years and then you have been divorced for 2 years and you have not remarried, then you qualify for 50% of your ex-spouse's Social Security benefit. They do have to be eligible to collect benefits, meaning that they need to be 62 years or older, but they don't have to have activated their benefit yet for you to be eligible for 50% of their benefit. You too would need to be 62 years old. But this is a lot of fun because a lot of times ladies will not realize it, and their benefit alone at 62, 65 years old is less than 50% of their ex-spouses. Now, one of the funny questions that we get consistently, and ladies, this may be disappointing, but one of the funny questions we get is, will it affect his benefit negatively? And the answer, as much of you may want it to, is no, he won't even know that it happened. It became a part of your legitimate benefit, kind of like a reward for having been married for 10 years, but it became a part of your benefit to use, and it does not affect the ex-spouse's benefit at all, nor does the ex-spouse know that that benefit is being drawn. Okay? Now, the second thing that we get a lot of questions on, and it is true, ladies, the moral of this story is you want to marry up. But for those of you that might have had multiple marriages, if you were married for 10 years, divorced for 2, and haven't remarried again, you can pick from the larger of the ex-spouse's benefits. And so that's a real thing. It really works, and people do it. So once you do remarry, though, you're no longer eligible for the ex-spouse benefit. So just want to explain that to you, ladies. It's a question that we get a lot, and want you to be aware of it. Now, longevity, men versus women, and compellingly over and over again, on average, women are outliving men 5 years. You see the average 77 years old on men, 82 on women. But I'm telling you, I'm seeing it here over and over again, going many, many years past 5 years. So 1 in 4 women now are living beyond age 90. So think about it. For 25% of you out there, you're going to be past age 90 before you pass. And that's a lot of years that you need to make sure and plan for. So that really factors into, will it be enough, right? So last thing I want to hit on real quickly in this area is that a total of 61% of women are going to be responsible for their financial retirement. 61%. And out of that 61%, look, 39% are married. But again, that 39% has a very high possibility of, at some point in their lives, adding to the divorced or the widowed percentage. And when we look at things about how things traditionally go with the married couple as they come into these meetings, typically Glenn and I will have meetings with married couples, and a lot of times the husband will come in and he's in charge of the finances, or he's put himself in charge, or she's okay with him being in charge of all the finances, and many times she really doesn't understand. And so Glenn and I will really try to open the door for the lady and let her begin to see into these investments and this retirement planning that she needs to take a very active role. I'm reminded of a story that happened just a few weeks ago, and the folks came in, and Jim and Mary, we'll call them, but they sat down in front of me, and Jim began to tell me everything about the investments, and Mary was kind of detached from the conversation. And Jim had spent a lot of time buying and selling certain things, and he wanted to tell me about his strategies. And I rarely heard from Mary during this time. And I talked to Jim for a minute, and I said, Jim, it seems like you're really comfortable handling these investments. And he says, oh, I am. I've done it for years. I'm very comfortable. I said, well, Jim, let me ask you a question. When you pass, is Mary as comfortable handling those things as you are? and he got quiet as a mouse. And it was that time that Mary engaged very well, and she says, "No, I am not." And I said, "Jim, I'd submit to you that Mary needs to be very comfortable with the plans that are going on, and she needs to have somebody in her life past you that she can look to for advice once you've passed, because many times, Jim, you'll be the first one to pass." So that was kind of where we started our relationship. Jim and Mary became clients, but it was neat to see Mary perk up. She wanted to be a part of it, and she really needed to. So ladies out there, if you're not involved now, get involved. You need to be a part of this, because I'm telling you, most of the time, these gentlemen are not around to know if the plan worked or it did not work. You're the one that's going to know if the plan worked or didn't work. So one way or another, you're going to get involved in it, and the sooner the better, okay? So when we talk about 61% of women being responsible for their retirement, you need to understand what happens when the male counterpart passes. So first off, you go into a higher tax bracket. So you were in married filing jointly, then suddenly you have gone into this tax bracket where you're a single tax filer, and that is a higher rate of tax. The next thing that happens is you lose one of the Social Security checks. So when a spouse passes, you get to keep the larger of the two Social Security benefits. One of the benefits goes away. And so suddenly now you've got less Social Security income coming in, and now you're in a higher tax bracket as well. And if that wasn't enough, many times that we see that a lot of times the gentlemen have chosen a single pay option if they had a pension. We had a lady come in a couple of weeks ago. It was funny. She was dragging her husband by the ear. He was with one of the auto companies, and she said he almost selected the single pay option on his pension. And I had to tell him that if he had selected that, when he passed, she would get nothing. So you need to be very careful and very aware that your counterparts do not choose single pay options if they have a company pension out there, because it cuts you out of that altogether. So the other thing that you need to be aware of that is a very unique situation is, for so many of you, you'll see that your husband may have a IRA or a large qualified plan, 403B, 457. And when they pass, that becomes yours, and you're required to take distributions off of it. And if you have one too, it combines with yours. And so now you're having less income come in a higher tax bracket. Now you're having to take bigger distributions off your qualified plan and pay more in taxes. And the good news is there is something that we can do about that early on if we can begin building that spousal plan early for you ladies. So always be thinking, what is the spousal plan? You need to pay attention to it, okay? Now, that put us into a part of talking about taxes for a minute. And we'll just hit this briefly. But one of the points that I want to point out to you ladies about taxes is that so many of you have always looked to your accountant or your CPA out there, whoever prepares the taxes for you, to give you tax advice around your investments. But by and large, when we're asking ladies, how is that working out? They're saying, well, gosh, I really don't feel like I'm getting good tax strategies in and around my investments. And so we've reached out to some of our accounting friends, and we know, that is the truth, ladies, that the reality is in today's accounting practices, the folks that are the CPAs and the tax preparers, they are compensated based on volume of tax returns done. And so legitimately, they're sitting there with you. They're going through the receipts. They're comparing this year's tax return to last year's tax return. They may tell you to contribute to your Roth or your IRA, but that's about the extent of the strategy that you're going to get, because there's 3 other people in the lobby just like you waiting to get back there and do the return. And so you need somebody in your life that can do those tax strategies for you, help you with strategies around your investments, and help get you steered in the right direction, okay? So Einstein said the hardest thing to understand in the world is the income tax. And I guarantee it's getting harder, ladies. Glenn and I are neither CPAs nor are we Albert Einsteins, but I will tell you that for many, many years for our clients, we have spent a lot of our time developing tax strategies in and around the investments. And if you do something over and over for a long period of time, hopefully you get better at it. And we like to think that we can identify those things very quickly, and we help lots of ladies with those strategies on an ongoing basis. So if you don't have that in your life, you need to have it, okay? Now, they passed a new Secure Act this year. And for you ladies, you need to understand a couple things about it very quickly. One thing with this new Secure Act was that they moved the required minimum distribution age up to 72 years old. So for many years, ladies, if you had an IRA, 403B, 401k, any of these qualified plans where the monies are growing tax deferred, you have to take those monies out one day, and you have to pay taxes on them when you take them out. Now, the government had been saying that if you hadn't begun distributing by 70 and a half years old, that you had to, and they give you a distribution schedule, and you have to pay taxes on that required distribution. They've moved the year and the age to 72. But what it actually means too is, yes, you get an extra year and a half to grow tax deferred, but when you begin making those withdrawals based on the government charts on the withdrawal rate, you're in a little bit higher withdrawal rate than you were in before. So you start off at a little bit stouter withdrawal. So the great news for you ladies is that we can do a whole lot to help you in these tax strategies between now and your age 72. Now, the bad news is we don't know what tax rates are going to be, but that just tells us that we need to get started earlier. The earlier you start, the better you'll be, okay? The other thing about that is we are in a unique time right now in our country's history as far as where the tax brackets are. So I gave you a comparison here of the old rate versus 2020's new rate. And I want you ladies to see that not only are the tax brackets lower right now than they were in 2017, but there's also more income within the tax brackets. So we're in some of the lowest tax conditions that we've been in since the 1920s. Again, take advantage. There are some things, if you walk away with anything tonight about taxes, walk away saying, you know what, we're in a very low tax environment right now, and we don't know what tax rates are going to be down the road, but we know that we've got some time between now and 2025 when the rates revert back that we could really make some headway for you ladies, and it will be headway that you will get to experience and flourish in for the rest of your lives. So if you don't have anybody helping you with that, make sure and get a fiduciary to help you with that, okay? Now, healthcare. This big topic, it's scary to a lot of folks, very cumbersome. Here at Keystone, we have a lady, Carol Ballinger, that works with us, that all she does for our folks is help them with Medicare decisions, help them with supplemental care. Again, we try to facilitate it where the things that you're going to come into contact with as you're planning your journey down the mountain, we have professionals here that are helping you make decisions in and around each of those areas. So you really need that out there. Now, I tell people around long-term care, long-term care is this highly avoided subject for so many people. But whether you avoid it or whether you address it head on, the facts are true. You are going to need a plan for long-term care. If you don't have one now, one will be provided for you. The problem is it may come at a cost that you never dreamed of, and it may not give you the care that you really wanted. And so I tell folks that there's multiple ways to skin a cat. There's multiple ways to have a plan for your long-term health care. The idea is that you need to have one, and you need to make sure that somebody around you, a close loved one, knows what it is, okay? So let's talk about that very quickly. Here's some statistics again. Someone turning age 65 today has almost a 70% chance of needing long-term care. So in one of the other statistic books, it shows clearly 7 out of 10 folks that are 65 years or older right now will need some form of long-term care going into the future. 1 to 3 years is how long you'll likely need it. Now, for you ladies, the average is 3.4 years of long-term care. For us gentlemen, only 2 years. We can't last very long. I mean, you guys outlive us. You can take more than we can, but 3.4 years is the average that ladies will be in a long-term care facility if they go in. And if they run into Alzheimer's, God forbid, my grandmother went through that, the average stay in long-term care is 7 years because they need a lot of care, but their health is very good. So the mind's not there, but the health is, and 7 years on average for an Alzheimer patient in long-term care. Now, the average annual cost of a private room in a qualified facility, that's $90,000. So when you're doing the math on that, it's a lot of money that has to be planned for. And if you don't plan for it, again, the good news is in America, you're going to get long-term care. Medicaid will take over, but they won't take over until they have depleted your assets down. Medicare only handles you for about 90 days, and then they turn it over to Medicaid. And if you can pay, they draw the money from you and your assets until you can no longer pay. And I will assure you they draw it at a very high rate. It goes away very rapidly. So in America, good news is you'll get health care. Bad news is it may cost you all that you had. And so we want to make sure that we plan for that ahead of time. If we can't cover it through insurance, and you can't have something at work that you might be able to pay into that's portable down the road, or your health situation won't allow you to cover any type of insurance for long-term care, then many times there are new asset programs out there consistently where some of the investments can have some benefits towards long-term care. In fact, the government is incentivizing companies to help build in features towards long-term care for folks because the government knows that they cannot supplement all of the baby boomers through long-term care. So they're actually incentivizing companies to come up with creative ways to help with long-term care benefits and tax favorable ways to fund long-term care. So again, sometimes the investments are a way to gear things into a long-term care plan. And if neither of those two are the case, then we can use some legal documents to at least protect the assets from Medicaid depleting them. Again, ladies, the point is, if you don't have a long-term care plan, you need one. There's more than one way to have one, and they don't necessarily have to be costly. It could be one of the least expensive things you ever did that saved you the most amount of money. So make sure you have somebody help you with that, okay? Now, market correction. This is the last part of what I wanted to cover with you this evening. And for you ladies, I want this to be critical to you because we have just come through a market correction. We saw COVID-19 come through. We saw the market go down very, very quickly. And this time, very fortunately, we had a rebound very quickly after. So let's talk about that. You know, 4 things to do, or some of them not to do, but 4 things to do during a market correction. Don't get emotional, okay? Now, when COVID-19 came along, I tell people it could be likened to a 9/11 event. You remember back to 9/11 when we watched the planes go into the World Trade Centers? Remember what happened? The market responded very abruptly. People began panicking, selling off stocks left and right. In fact, the government stepped in, if you'll remember, and they shut the market down. We couldn't even trade during that time. And during that time, do you remember the planes were grounded on the ground and we couldn't even travel? So they didn't issue stay-at-home orders, but you couldn't travel anywhere nonetheless. And that had nothing to do with economic conditions at all, but it was very fear-based in the sell-off that happened. Now, it took people a lot of time for some of them to make up for what happened in that emotional crisis. This time around, very similar thing happened. We saw COVID-19 come in. We saw people beginning to panic. We saw people selling off stocks, bonds, everything all at once. And we saw a very steep decline, 28%. This time around, luckily, the government began pouring stimulus into the market directly, putting it into the hands of people, and they began spending the money. And suddenly we saw that people were gaining confidence back in the market again, and the market corrected very quickly. That's great. But none of our people here at Keystone Financial that were invested in the market, and most everybody here has investments in the market, None of them were in a panic, not one of them. And it is because of the methodology of how we've set things up to begin with, how things are allocated, how things are diversified. But we didn't have any of that panic going on. And we want to make sure that when market corrections come along, you ladies are positioned in such a way where there is not some type of an emotional sell off that will take place during that time. Now, the other thing is that I'll hit on very quickly is if this COVID-19 period has done anything at all for you ladies, it should have brought to the forefront that if you're not prepared, if you don't know where things are, if you don't know where each of your accounts are, if you don't know how things are functioning, you ladies really need to. I mean, think about this. If you're married, what if, just what if, that your husband became ill with COVID-19 and passed very quickly in the next 2 weeks? If that happened, would you know where everything was? Would you know how everything was working? Do you know what the plan is? If you don't, you should be prompted to get in control of that right away. You're in control of making sure that you know how things would work and where things are. I had a physician come into me maybe 4 weeks ago, and it was really an uncommon case, but she came in and she had moved around to 4 different hospitals in Nashville. She was highly sought after. She was making a great living, and she was a very intelligent lady. But when we began to look into her investments, we found that she had 3 different qualified plans that were at other hospitals, and she hadn't even brought them over so that she had consolidated in one place. So it really, as we began looking at that, we had our whole team get involved. We've got a team that works just with consolidating assets and bringing things over. So they got with her. They were able to locate those accounts. But she said, I've been so uh, uh, positioned in such a way to where I was having to work and concentrate on making the living that I haven't been thinking that much about these old accounts, and I've just been letting them go and letting them roll. But she said, I'm realizing now there's been some of them I haven't looked at in years. And ladies, that is just not acceptable, because I know that the income and the cash flow right now is the most important thing, but this is what's going to cash flow you in the future. And so if you don't have anybody that's helping you sort those things out or finding those things, not to worry, you don't have to tackle that on your own. We've got a team of folks here that do nothing but help people consolidate and put things together and put all of the pieces together. So you want to make sure that that is done. Now, understanding your actual risk. This is a huge one. If you don't know where you are on the risk scale and you don't know what would happen to your accounts in a market correction, you need to. What I'm about to talk to you ladies about very quickly is much different than the conversation of, are you allocated, 60% equities, 40% bonds, or vice versa. This is not that conversation. We want each and every one of our clients to know exactly where their accounts would fall if a market correction came along. So if I ask you ladies the question, hey, if the next market correction comes along and the accounts go down by 30% in that correction, do you know how much your retirement accounts will sustain of that 30%? How much will your retirement accounts go down? Will they go down 30%? Do you know? If you don't know the answer to that question, I would submit that you need to. With every single client, we are able to produce a report, and this is an ongoing report, but it is assigning them a risk score on a scale of 1 to 100. And our software goes in and it looks at the entire portfolio and it says, okay, on a scale of 1 to 100, here's where they fall with a risk score. But more importantly than that, it takes every holding that they've got, every single share of that holding, and it runs it through a stress test to show again if that 30% correction took place, how much would their account go down? Would they sustain 10 or 12% of that, or would they go down the full 30%? And if you don't know the answer to that question, it is imperative that you know it. Find somebody that can help you get the answer to that question, okay? Now, the next thing is acting your age. And this one's a funny one, but ladies, constantly we see this. We'll see somebody come into our office for the first time and they'll say, okay, I'm approaching, 10 years away from retirement and I wanted to get started looking at planning things. and we'll look into their portfolio, and it's arranged in such a way that you would think they were 30 years old. And so I hear people all the time saying, well, I was trying to catch up. I was getting real aggressive because I was trying to make up for lost time. That is a terrible strategy. 9 times out of 10, you will be way behind on that strategy. So make sure to act your age. Things need to be positioned appropriate to the age you're at and your time horizon for when you're going to retire. And then finally, creating an actual plan. I would show you that with each of our ladies, we build them a beautiful binder that has a full comprehensive plan inside of it that is covering multiple areas inside this comprehensive plan. So we want to make sure that inside this plan we've covered income planning, because face it, ladies, without income, there's no retirement. So we want to put that as a focus first. We want to cover that income planning for you ladies and make sure that your income is not going to run out prior to your life, and that you're going to be able to experience retirement at the level that you had dreamed of experiencing that. Secondly, we want to make sure and cover the investments, and we want to tie them right in with the income plan. We want to make sure that you're diversified well, that you're allocated well, but we also want to look at those stress tests, because we want to make sure that how you're invested is never negatively affecting that income plan. We want to make sure that just because the market went down, you didn't have to change your lifestyle. Make sense? I hope so. So then we want to make sure that everything that you're doing is functioning as tax efficiently as possible, and that we've planned for tomorrow's tax consequences inside of each of your portfolios. So we want to make sure and go ahead and estimate those required minimum distributions. We want to add in cost of living adjustments and things like that. And we want to look at how are those taxes going to affect you down the road. Next, we want to make sure that a healthcare plan is in place, and that if every opportunity that we get to, that we have positioned things in a helpful manner towards healthcare down the road. And then finally, we want to make sure that as far as your legal documents and legacy planning is done, that we have made sure that because Tennessee is a probate state, everything that you have as much as possible bypasses probate. We want to make sure your will's in order, your power of attorneys are in order. We even want to look into your accounts and make sure that there are pass on death or transfer on death forms signed, so that when you pass away, somebody can still pay the bills immediately, and that doesn't go into probate. So there's lots of things to having a comprehensive plan. But for most ladies out there, they've never experienced someone in the financial professional realm that is working hand in hand with their accountant and building a relationship with the people that are doing their taxes and building a relationship with the person that's doing their legal planning. But that's exactly what we want to do. We want to work hand in hand with your attorney, work hand in hand with your accountant. If you don't have those professionals, we have those relationships right here. So whether you're working with your attorney or ours, we want to be on board, and we want the right hand to know what the left hand is doing so that the plan is very cohesive. And we hear ladies tell us all the time that they have never been a part of something where all the professionals in their life were working collectively together and creating something comprehensive, and the right hand knew what the left hand was doing. So I reached the end of that. I want to tell you a story just briefly that was so pivotal to Glenn and I, and so pivotal in the culture of our company here at Keystone Financial. And years ago, we had a client, and the client's son had gone to Afghanistan, and we would hear, stories from time to time about how the son was doing, how he's serving. And then unfortunately, a really terrible accident out there. And we would check in periodically, and he was recovering. And finally, one day, we got to meet the son, and he came to an event, and we were introduced. And I said, Mark, tell me a little bit about your story over there. I understand that you went through a terrible injury. And he said, yeah. He said, my job was to every day get in a Humvee, and I would go out, me and 3 other soldiers, and we would go forward, and we would look at the area that our battalion was going to go into each day. We would do some surveillance. We would go out with our binoculars. We would try to make sure that that area was as safe as possible before the rest of the battalion came in. And he said, I did that day in and day out. And he said, on the day I was injured, it was a pretty normal day with the exception of a couple things. He said, I just really felt impressed upon to pray before I went out. He said, I even added a scripture to the side of my helmet, which was touching to us. But he said, I went out in the Humvee that day and we went over some dunes. And he said, I got out of the Humvee, had my gun with me, and was beginning to go down a dune to look at the area that we were going to go into. And he said, I heard a click. And he said, it didn't really register in my mind, but very quickly after that, a loud boom. And he said, I don't remember anything past that until recovery. But he said, what had happened is I had stepped on a landmine. And he said, the landmine blew up. It injured me terribly. I had third-degree burns all over my body. He said, it actually blew my right ear completely off of my body. And he said, I want to tell you today, he said, my ear is here on my head and I have 100% hearing in my right ear. And I stopped him and I said, Mark, stop the story. I said, you're telling me that your ear was blown completely off of your head and now you have 100% hearing. And I've missed the part of the story about how your ear got back on your head. And he said, well, he said they sewed it back on and they were able to do that. And I said, well, how did your ear make it back to your body to get put back on in Frankfurt? And he said, well, when I had that explosion, he said, our team goes in and looks for, any missing body parts. And if there are missing body parts, they collect them and they tape them to your person. And so that they're there when you get to the hospital. And I said, I can't even believe that, Mark. I said, you mean that in an enemy territory with bombs blowing off and obviously the enemy very close, you've got a guy that knows to go out there and look for body parts, collect them, tape them to your chest. And he said, absolutely. He said, that's what we train to do. He said, when something like that happens, when a crisis happens, our men know what to do. They go into action, they work the plan, and that is why I'm able to hear 100% today. And that was so impressive to Glenn and I. And we came back and we said, you know what, folks? Everybody here, we had a big staff meeting and we said, for every one of our Keystone clients here, from now on, I want everybody here in this room to always know what to do. For every one of these clients, I want them to know that they've got a team of people here that when a crisis comes up, that when those obstacles come up in life that you weren't expecting, you've got somebody side by side with you that knows exactly what to do, that there was a plan in advance for that, and we have to just simply plug in and start working that plan at that point. And so it changed the culture of Keystone Financial from that day forward. It is a part of who we are, and that's what we do. And if you don't have a team like that working for you, that when the crises of life come up, you've got somebody that knows what to do, and there's a plan already formulated for it. Ladies, more than ever, you need that. Okay, so I'm at the end. I want to tell you, ladies, that for those of you ladies that were in two groups and you said, hey, I am that group that has identified that, yes, I want to become more active in my retirement. I want to take some actions. I want to get a better understanding of what's going on. If that's you, ladies, I want you to take an action right now. I want you to look over to the right, and there's a place where you can press a button there to the right, and it is going to help you schedule a 15-minute phone call with Glenn or myself. Now, ladies, I will tell you in that 15-minute phone call, Glenn and I make no assumption that because we're talking to you on the phone that we're a good fit to work with you or you're a good fit to work with our firm, okay? The purpose of this 15-minute phone call for you ladies is that Glenn and I want to make sure and answer what questions you had. We want to try to get you pointed in the right direction and moving forward. And then if it's appropriate for us to go any further than that, we'll know it and we'll talk about that together. But for each of you ladies that is in that group that doesn't freeze up, that doesn't go into analysis paralysis. For those of you ladies that want to take an active role in making sure that you are prepared for retirement and that you're doing everything that you can in preparation in those investments, make sure and take advantage of that 15-minute phone call. Glenn and I will give you our very best. So thank you, ladies, for joining us tonight. I hope it was informative, and I hope you'll come back to another one of our webinars. Have a great evening.